The first thing that little girl said to me wasn't hello. She looked straight at me and asked if I could be her mom for just one day. And she didn't smile when she asked it. She just stood there, holding that old teddy bear tight against her chest, her eyes fixed on mine like she was trying not to beg, but couldn't hide it completely. Like she had already asked this question many times in her head before she ever said it out loud. And I remember sitting there in the snow, my phone still in my hand, suddenly unable to answer something so small and so heavy at the same time. I was only supposed to be on a quick lunch break, sitting on a park bench while the snow fell in slow, soft flakes around me. But even then, I was still working, still answering emails, still half trapped inside meetings, deadlines, and decisions, waiting back at the office. Being the youngest CEO of Sterling Media Group had taught me how to look calm, even when I wasn't. Everything about me looked put together, except whatever it was inside me that a child somehow noticed in seconds. I hadn't seen her walk up. I only heard that tiny voice say, "Excuse me, ma'am." And when I looked up, she was standing right in front of me, maybe 4 or 5 years old. Blonde hair pulled into a messy little ponytail, a brown coat slightly too big for her small frame, and that worn teddy bear tucked under one arm, like he was there to help her stay brave. I asked her if she needed something, but instead of answering, she looked at my face and asked, "Are you sad?" And I remember letting out a quiet breath, because that question landed deeper than I expected. I asked her why she thought that, and she said, "You look like my daddy sometimes, when he thinks I'm not watching, like you're carrying something heavy." I didn't know it then, but that moment stayed with me longer than anything else that day. I told her, sometimes, just that, nothing more. And somehow, that was enough for her to stay. She told me her name was Sophie, then lifted the teddy bear slightly and said his name was Mr. Bear. I told her mine was Victoria, and for a moment she just studied me with those serious, quiet eyes, like she was deciding if she could trust me with something bigger. Then she pointed across the park to a man sitting on another bench, pacing through a phone call, stressed, distracted. The kind of call that doesn't really end, even after you hang up. She said, "That's my daddy. He's always on the phone for work. He says it's important." And I looked at him a little longer than I meant to, because I understood that kind of important. Then she said her mom was in heaven, just like that, soft, simple, like something she had learned to say without breaking. She said her daddy told her that her mom was watching over her, but sometimes she still wished she could see her, talk to her, have someone to do things with. I felt my chest tighten, because she wasn't asking for anything big. She wanted ice cream, pretty things, someone to show her small things that mothers usually don't even think about. She said her daddy tried, and I believed her, but he didn't know how to braid hair, and sometimes she just wanted someone who did. Then she asked again, slower this time, like she needed me to really hear it. "Can I spend one day with you? Just one day. You could be my mom for a day. I promise I'll be good." And there was no drama in her voice, just a small, careful kind of hope. I looked over at her father again, still on the phone, shoulders tight, jaw tense, trying to hold everything together. And I recognized that look immediately. Different lives, same weight. So I told Sophie I needed to talk to her daddy first, that we had to make sure it was okay. And the moment I said that, her whole face changed. Not because I had said yes, but because I hadn't said no. Sometimes hope starts right there. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward him. And as we got closer, I could hear him saying, "I understand the deadline, but I'm a single parent. I can't work 16-hour days anymore." His voice steady, but only just. He ended the call when he saw us. "Sophie, honey, I told you not to bother people." He said, gentle but exhausted. And she looked up at him and said, I didn't bother her. Daddy, I asked her something important. I introduced myself, Victoria Sterling, and told him what she had asked me. His name was James Wilson, and for a second his expression shifted, something between embarrassment and heartbreak. He told her she couldn't ask strangers for things like that. But Sophie shook her head, still holding my hand, and said quietly, She's not a stranger anymore. And, standing there in the cold, between a father trying not to fall apart and a little girl just trying to feel less alone, I realized this was never really about just one day. It was about all the quiet things people carry, without saying, until someone small enough finally sees them. I didn't expect the moment to go any further. I thought maybe her dad would pull her away, apologize, and that would be it. But instead, Sophie held onto my hand a little tighter and said, Daddy, her name is Victoria. She's really nice, and she looks lonely like us. Maybe we could all be less lonely together. She said it fast, like she was afraid she wouldn't get the whole sentence out if she paused. I felt something shift in my chest when she said that, not because it was dramatic, but because it was simple, and true in a way I hadn't been ready to say out loud. James looked at her, then at me, and I could see it in his face, that quiet conflict between protecting his daughter and knowing she needed something he couldn't fully give her right now. He started to say, something polite, something careful. Miss Sterling, I appreciate your kindness, but we couldn't possibly. And before he could finish, I found myself interrupting him. Gently, You're not imposing. And I surprised myself a little when I added, Honestly, I think I might need this just as much as she does. I hadn't planned to say that, but once it was out, I couldn't take it back, and I didn't want to. Something in my voice must have landed, because his expression softened just enough, not fully convinced, but no longer closed. He nodded slightly and said, Maybe we should sit down and talk properly. So we did, the three of us, on that cold bench, Sophie sitting between us, still holding my hand, like she was afraid the moment might disappear if she let go. And I started explaining, not like a business conversation, not like something polished, just honestly. I told him who I was, that I ran Sterling Media Group, that I had spent the last 15 years building something I thought mattered, that I had never married, never had children, and that somehow, without realizing it, my entire life had slowly narrowed down to just work. Emails, meetings, decisions, repeat. I told him that morning had been my 35th birthday, and I had woken up to a quiet apartment, no messages that meant anything, no one waiting for me, and that I came to the park because I didn't know what else to do with that feeling. I needed space to think, to ask myself if this was really the life I wanted, or just the one I had gotten used to. And then I looked at Sophie and said, and then she showed up and somehow saw right through me. James let out a small breath and looked down at his daughter. The way he looked at her, it stayed with me. There was so much love there, and so much exhaustion sitting right next to it. He told me her mom had passed away 2 years ago, cancer, and since then, it had just been the two of them. He said he was trying to be both parents, but some days it felt like he was failing at both. He told me he worked as a software engineer, long hours, constant pressure, and that Sophie needed more attention than he could always give, not because he didn't care, but because he was stretched too thin. And when he said that, he didn't look at me. He looked at the ground. I didn't know it then, but that conversation changed something in me more than anything else that day. So I said it slowly, thinking it through as I spoke. What if this wasn't just one day? I could feel both of them listening. What if we made it something regular? Maybe once a week. I spend a day with Sophie. You get time to work, Or just breathe a I paused, then added quietly, and it gives me something I didn't realize I was missing. Sophie didn't say anything, but her eyes lit up in a way that said everything. James, though, he studied me carefully, like he was trying to understand not just what I was offering, but why. Victoria, he said after a moment, still cautious, why would you do this? You don't know us. And I didn't overthink it this time. I just told him the truth. Because your daughter asked me if I was lonely, and I realized I am. I let that sit for a second, then said, I spent years building a career, but I never built a life around it. And then, softer, and she looks at me like I could matter to her. Do you know how rare that feels? He didn't answer right away, just sat there, thinking, weighing everything the way a parent does when it comes to their child. And finally he said, Can I think about it? Maybe we can exchange information. Do this the right way. Of course, I said, and I meant it. That night, he called. We talked for over an hour. Careful questions, honest answers. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. And by the end of it, we agreed to try one Saturday a month, just to see how it felt. The first Saturday, I remember I barely slept the night before, not because I was worried something would go wrong, but because I hadn't felt that kind of anticipation in a long time. I had planned everything: breakfast, museum, lunch, things I thought a child would enjoy. But I didn't realize then she wasn't there for the plan. She opened the door wearing the same brown coat, holding Mr. Bear, and the first thing she said was, You came? Like she had been preparing herself for the chance that I might not. Of course I came. I promised, didn't I? That day didn't go the way I planned. It went better. She wanted to stop everywhere, look at everything, ask questions about things I had never thought twice about. She held my hand the entire time, talked about her favorite things, her fears, the small details that make up a child's world. At lunch, she looked up at me and said, Victoria, can I tell you something? Always. My mama used to take me for hot chocolate before she got sick. I miss that. There are moments you don't prepare for, and that was one of them. I felt my eyes sting a little, but I kept my voice steady. Do you want to get hot chocolate after this? She nodded and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't come easily. We sat there later, 2 cups of hot chocolate between us, and she told me about her mom, how she used to sing to her, make funny pancakes, always know when she needed a hug. And I listened, not trying to fix anything, not trying to replace anything. I'm not trying to take her place, I said quietly, because that part mattered. I didn't realize when it changed from just one day to something neither of us wanted to let go of. It didn't happen all at once. It just stayed and slowly became part of my life in a way I hadn't planned for. One Saturday turned into 2, then somehow it was every weekend, and I found myself doing things I would have never agreed to 6 months earlier, leaving the office early, handing off work, saying no to meetings that used to feel non-negotiable, not because I suddenly cared less about my career, but because, for the first time, there was something else that mattered just as much. Sophie filled her days with small things, the kind of things I used to overlook. She wanted to learn how to braid her hair, so we sat on the floor one afternoon, her back against my knees while I tried to get it right. She laughed when I messed up, then made me try again. We baked cookies that didn't come out perfect, went to the zoo, the aquarium, places I hadn't stepped into in years. Not because I didn't have time, but because I had forgotten how to make space for things that didn't have a purpose. At first, I bought her things, books, clothes, little toys, and then I caught myself, worried, I was stepping into a place that wasn't mine. But one evening, when James came to pick her up, he looked at me and said quietly, You're giving her something I can't. And when I didn't respond right away, he added, "And you're giving me something too. Time to breathe. Time to not feel like I'm failing every minute." I shook my head a little and said the truth without thinking. "She's giving me more than I'm giving her." And I meant it. I had lived so long thinking I was full until I realized how empty it actually felt. About 6 months in, Sophie asked me something I didn't expect. She stood there, careful with her words, like she didn't want to hurt anyone. "I know you're not my real mama." She paused, then looked at me. "But you're the closest thing I have. Will you come to my school tea party?" I said yes before she even finished asking. I sat there that day at a tiny table, holding a plastic teacup, listening to children talk over each other, and for a moment I forgot who I was supposed to be outside that room. Her teacher smiled at me and spoke to me like I was her mother, and I didn't correct it, not because I wanted to take someone else's place, but because, in that moment, it felt like I belonged there. Sophie introduced me to her friends with a kind of pride I didn't know how to respond to. "This is Victoria. She's my special person." And something about the way she said it stayed with me longer than anything else that day. On the way back to the car, she slipped her hand into mine and said quietly, "Thank you for coming. I didn't know if anyone would come for me, but you did." And I told her the only thing I knew was true. "I'll always come when you need me." I didn't say it lightly, and I didn't take it back later. That night, James asked me to stay for dinner. It had started to become routine by then, the three of us sitting together, talking about simple things, about her day, about work, about life in a way that didn't feel heavy. After Sophie went to bed, he asked me something that made me pause. "When she first asked you, why did you really say yes?" I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer wasn't something I used to say out loud. But I told him anyway, because I spent my birthday alone. I looked down at my hands for a bowl confite. Second, because I built something that looked like a life, but there was no one in it. And then quieter, and she asked me if I was lonely, and I couldn't lie to her. There was a long silence after that, not uncomfortable, just real. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. "She didn't just need me. She changed me." James reached across the table and took my hand, and I felt it before he even spoke. "I'm falling in love with you, Victoria." He said it carefully, like he didn't want to rush it or scare it away. I didn't expect it, but I can't ignore it either. I didn't hesitate, not that time. "I love you too." And it surprised me how easy it felt to say, "Both of you." A year later, we got married. Sophie walked down the aisle holding Mr. Bear in one hand and flowers in the other, smiling like she had been waiting for that moment her whole life at the reception. She stood up and said something that made the entire room quiet. "I asked Victoria to be my mama for one day. She looked at me and she said yes, and then she didn't leave." 3 years later, I found myself back on that same park bench, only this time I wasn't alone. Our 6-month-old son was sleeping in a stroller beside me. Sophie, now 8, sat next to me reading, occasionally leaning against my arm like she always had. She looked up and asked, "What are you thinking about?" And I smiled a little, because some moments don't really leave you the day we met. I remember the way Sophie looked up at me that afternoon, like she wasn't just asking a question. She was checking if something had really changed. "About the day I asked if you were lonely," she said, and I nodded a little. "Were you?" I didn't rush the answer. I looked at her, then at the baby sleeping quietly in the stroller. Then I thought about James waiting for us at home, and for a second, I let myself feel the difference. Yeah, I was more than I realized. I smiled a little after that, but I'm not anymore. Not because everything is perfect, just because I'm not alone in it anymore. She leaned her head against my shoulder like she always does when she feels safe. "I'm not lonely either," she said. Then after a small pause, "You know what I think?" I asked her what, and she said it in that simple way that always seems to land deeper than expected. "I think sometimes angels don't look like angels. Sometimes they're just little girls with teddy bears. And sometimes they're people sitting on benches who don't even know they need someone yet. And somehow they find each other anyway." I didn't correct her. I just kissed the top of her head, because sometimes kids say things you don't need to explain, you just need to feel. Later, I would think about that day more times than I can count. Not in a dramatic way, just in quiet moments, when everything slows down for a second. I think about how one small question changed the direction of my life, without asking for permission. How something that was supposed to be just one day turned into something I can't imagine losing. I had spent years building something that looked like success, something people respected, something that kept me busy enough not to notice what was missing. And I'm not saying any of that was wrong. It mattered. It still matters. I still run my company. I still make decisions that carry weight. That part of my life didn't disappear. But now it sits next to something else, something quieter, but stronger. School mornings, small conversations, laughter that doesn't need a reason, a home that feels lived in, not just managed. If there's anything I've learned from all of this, it's not that one path is better than the other. It's that sometimes you can build everything and still feel like there's a space no achievement can fill. And sometimes that space doesn't get filled by something big. It gets filled by something simple, someone showing up, someone staying. I said yes to a child who asked for one day. I didn't know it would become a lifetime. And I'm not saying every moment like that leads somewhere beautiful. Life doesn't always work that way. But I do think we miss more than we realize when we keep ourselves too closed, too careful, too busy to notice what's right in front of us. So, if you take anything from my story, maybe it's just this: pay attention to the small moments, the ones that don't look important at first, because sometimes that's where everything changes. And if this story stayed with you in any way, you can let me know, share your thoughts, or just stay for the next one. You never really know which story might feel a little too familiar.